Hi, welcome to SchezzWho, your top spot for politics. Rolling along at 211 subscribers. Let's keep this growing. So you subscribe to SchezzWho channel both on YouTube and TikTok, and you like and share this video among the others. Some comments in there too. Now on to my early show shout outs, including the Dissent Agenda, which is a sort of a sibling podcast by Melissa Lucasen and Cody Connor. And they have generously given me their StreamYard account in order to do my show. So I want to direct you to the Dissent Agenda to catch their latest on political stuff, both in Virginia Beach and Tidewater and nationwide. I also want to say Farley Perkins at the Farley Perkins Agency can help you out with insurance needs in the 757. So give them a shout out. If you're looking for some good food tonight, I would suggest Ellen's Home Style and Barbecue Express, both in Portsmouth, right here on Portsmouth Boulevard, or in Virginia Beach, across the street from Regent University. And if you want to finish with a nice dessert, then head on over to ELG Sweet Boutique on High Street here in Portsmouth. I want to shout out Positive Vibes Incorporated by my good friend, Mr. Seiko Varner. He'll help you out with some money needs, some suggestions, consulting. He's also a great DJ. If you need any of that, he'll help you out. And he also created the Hampton Roads Green Book, a fantastic application that helps you find Black-owned businesses here in the 757. Last, certainly not least, I want you to direct your attention to the Black Swan Mindset, The Chronicles, a podcast done by my awesome wife, Andrea Dixon Chesvenner, and also check out her Substack, also under the Black Swan Mindset, The Chronicles name, and follow it in all the need be places that do podcasts and read the Substack. Now, this is show one of a January 30th SchezzWho doubleheader. Roanoke City Councilman Nick Hagen is my guest. Councilman Hagen is an attorney with his JD from George Mason University, the Patriots. He has count them, three bachelors from Lynchburg University, one in psychology, one in philosophy, one in religious studies. He's a member of the Roanoke chapter of the Kiwanis Club, let's hope I pronounced that correctly, which volunteers to help children. And he was elected in 2024, and I'm going to bring him on right now, good sir. How are you, and how was your day, and how was your week?
I'm doing well. Week's been relatively good. We've been digging ourselves out of the big ice storm that we had earlier this week, and I gotta give a shout out to like all the people that are in public works. They're working round the clock in order to get a lot of this ice off of our roads and out of it. But yeah, I've been good. Just getting some stuff done before we have another snowstorm that's coming up. Probably starts tomorrow. Just getting all the stuff together.
Cool little thing is that I started a job at Kroger a couple months back, and we get our supplies basically from Roanoke. So it has denied us a few days every time a snowstorm would go by and mainly hit Roanoke as opposed to Hampton Roads. We would get delayed by at least a day or so on some of our stuff. So let's hopefully it doesn't hit you guys too bad, because we would like our stuff here in the Shore Drive in Virginia Beach. Plus, I think the snowstorm might affect Eastern Virginia a little bit more this time compared to last time, but I don't think you'll be completely out of the woods. So definitely be on the ready for that. Now, Roanoke itself, it's your hometown. I believe your family has been there for over a century in the area. And now last year, I had on Delegate Sam Russell, also from Roanoke. I'd like to ask you about your neck of the Roanoke Woods and what you know about the character of the city, your favorite things about the city, what makes Roanoke special to you?
Yeah. So I was born and raised here. Like you said, my family's been here for well over a century now. We came over from Lebanon on my mother's side. And so like I'm half Lebanese. No, I don't look it. We came over. One of the things I love about Roanoke is that outdoorsy feel that we've had for a real long time. We have some of the best hiking, which I highly recommend if you ever come down this way. just enjoy a lot of our outdoor facilities and that kind of thing. For me, like I said, my family's been here forever, and I was happy to meet my wife. Actually, in Lynchburg when I went to school there. But we reconnected after a few years out of college back here in Roanoke, and decided to start a family here. And yeah, I just love the community, love talking with people, like that kind of thing.
Now, I've had on a couple people who have been to the Lynchburg area, and they attended as students as well. But that was Liberty.
Yeah.
I will admit, in bringing you on and looking up a little bit of your bio, that's when I came to the knowledge of the existence of the University of Lynchburg. I probably could have known that. That is my mistake, but I
No
do want to
worries.
give you your kudos to how much you have studied
Mhm.
over the years, especially those three distinct topics. That just proves to me that you're a thinker on a various level. So that's pretty cool. Um, so I want to go to a little bit more about the government of
Yeah.
Roanoke. It's an at-large system, both for the
Mhm.
council elections and mayor. You have lost a race in that system, and then you won immediately afterwards. Do you like at-large as a system? Do you like direct district representation as a system? If the choice was yours, what would you pick?
I prefer a ward system. Roanoke, the city happens to be like I think one of three, if I remember right, in Virginia where we don't have a ward system. And the reason why I like it is that one, purely from a stance of like just the running of elections and representation, it's a lot easier to get in contact with the person that represents, like, say, I'll use this number. This isn't something where I think that the award should be specifically this size, but like 10,000 people versus, say, 100,000, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is like when we talk about the business of campaigning, it's a lot cheaper to run campaigns where you're, talking with 10,000 people versus trying to talk to 100,000. And that may not sound like that may sound like a political class problem. Like, why would anybody care? That's dealing with issues with like affordability. The problem is that there's plenty of people that have good ideas to run governments and to talk with people about them and talk about what their policies want to see done that are priced out because they have to campaign to 100,000 people.
Mhm.
Um, I was looking at the Virginia Public Access Project, or VPAP, as
Shout out VPAP. There we go.
yep, love them. But when we talk about campaigns, like the last councilmanic campaign, I think total spent was something around like $500,000 between all of the candidates around that. Um, like when you talk about that type of money, which could easily go towards take your pick, like
Mhm.
you end up pricing out so many people. Like I was very blessed with the fact that I had a great team behind me in both times that I ran, and was able to take just put in the money that I could. Not everyone has that luxury, and so when we end up taking that away from folks, it raises a lot of concerns for me. Um, and I understand that I was, when I looked at VPAP, I think a while back, I ended up spending, I think, the most amount of money to win.
Mhm.
But you have to understand too that one of the things that Roanoke has had is that I'm the first Republican elected in 24 years, something like that.
Mhm.
Um, we didn't really have a great playbook. Like I was literally throwing everything at the wall, see if it stuck. Like mailers, text messages. I 3D printed phone holders that we handed out. I can get you one if you want.
Yeah.
Uh, we were trying all of these things to try and reach people and be like, hey, this is what we're seeing here. again, not everybody has that ability. And so,
Mhm.
to limit yourself to, to this political class, I think ends up being kind of dangerous in the long term for our republic.
Mm. Now, I want to go through a little bit about things that you ran on.
Yeah.
Very first thing is rezoning. A little bit about that, where it stands now versus when you were running.
Mhm. Yeah. So one of the things that previous council did, they basically effectively got rid of single family zoned houses throughout the city. And to a lot of people, that sounds like, oh yeah, this should help with affordability, and that's how it was marketed to a lot of people. The problem is that what is happening with, or what happens with that, as we have seen in cities that have done this, such as Minneapolis, Portland. There's a place in New Mexico that did this pretty early on, is that they tended to see prices increase by about 20 or 30% more than what their average state cost was. Um, and that may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about the difference in the price of a home, yeah, anybody who's ever bought any property ever who kind of knows that that's going to be a lot.
Mhm.
But one of the fundamental things about this was that it was sold to the public as this is a way to allow for affordable housing. And the reason why it was sold that way is that they were focusing on smaller homes, right? Which, if you look at it purely from the cost of the property itself, okay, it will be. But the problem is that it will increase by about 20% the average cost per square foot. And because of the way that Virginia, specifically Roanoke, ends up taxing our real estate taxes,
Mhm.
they do it based on the average, effectively the assessed value, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so you end up pricing out a bunch of people that would have these larger homes that can't now afford those taxes, and that creates a much larger problem again, kind of spiraling down. So that's the basic gist of these zoning changes. And I know that's a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but where we are now is, so I wasn't the only person that got elected to council that was
Mhm.
running on this, and a lot of the concerns came about from these issues when we talk about like places that are historical, places that that are being torn down in order to allow for more gentrification, allow for like that type of
Mhm.
building types. Um, and so we I put together a council member initiative to basically reanalyze kind of these things. It was kind of felt that by some of the other members of council wanted to try tweaking things rather than going with a straight out repeal. I respect their opinion. But I'm more in favor of a straight out repeal, because I think that long term that this is going to be a bit harmful towards the long term affordability of Roanoke.
Now, I think the tax rate, as you just mentioned, was
Yeah.
something you also ran on as well. Would you like to touch on what it was at the time, what it is now, status on that?
So our tax rate hasn't changed in about 20 some odd years, for real estate specifically. But the problem has been that the assessed value keeps going up. Basically, that, let's say your house 5 years ago was worth $50,000, right? And then now it's worth $100,000. Even though the tax rate hasn't changed, you're now paying more for your tax for your home, because the assessed value of it goes up. Now you'll say, well, okay, there are some people that will say, well, you'll recoup those costs when you choose to sell it, right? And partially that's true, but because you're still dealing with the payments of those taxes, to most people, it doesn't feel like the taxes are being stagnant, and especially for people that rely on, that are retired, that are older, that are like single family income, that are
Mhm.
like living relatively close to the poverty line or anything like that. That has real implications. Even though, like, so one of the things that I talked about with people was that I would have loved to have seen like, hey, anytime that we see an increase of the assessed value, we try and reduce it by the average amount.
Mhm.
That doesn't solve all the problems because averages mount, right? Let's say that I think last year when we had the tax assessment, I asked the real estate valuation, the director of real estate valuation, what was the largest single property increase as percentage, and then the amount, because those two numbers are different, or can be different. The largest amount for, I believe, a single property was something like 1,500%. But what that there's a story as to why that happened that way, which I'll tell in a sec. But the largest for a single property was a apartment complex that increased by about $3 million in taxes because of how much property that they were doing to do, that kind of thing. The story about the home that ended up getting like an increase of 1,500% or so, basically the previous owner ended up doing a lot of repair work and didn't get the proper permits for it. So they under the table and sold it, right? Sold the house to the new owners. New owners now are on the hook for the tax rate that the previous homeowner did. I'm an attorney. I believe in things like justice and fairness and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's not right. And that's one of the things that I would love to be able to look into. But because Virginia is a Dillon rule state, which I'm sure we will talk about soon, it kind of binds our hands when we talk about law, especially on the local government level.
And on the local government level, especially when you were running, there was concerns with a space called Evan Springs.
Mm-hmm.
I would like you to bring a little bit of history on what it is, what
Yeah.
is possibly being planned on it, and what would you like to do if you were a majority on council?
So, kind of to understand Evan Springs, you kind of have to understand a lot of Roanoke's history. So, like a lot of places here in Virginia and throughout the South, we were segregated. Things like redlining and the bird machine, when it was still active, were very prominent in Virginia. Um, and as a result, we saw segregation. The easiest way to kind of understand that aspect, and I'm going over a lot of history here that, I kind of have to paint with broad strokes, but highly recommend talking with folks like there's a guy named Jordan Bell, a couple of other historians throughout Roanoke that can talk way longer about this and are way better than I am to do this story any justice. But basically, areas like Gainsborough and Northwest Roanoke ended up being very segregated. So people who were non-white would be able to live particularly there, and wouldn't be able to live in like the south western part of the city. For my family, when we came over from Lebanon, we weren't considered white. Again, I am well aware of how I look. I don't look Lebanese. But my family started a store over in Henry Street, and it was a grocery store that was started originally by my great grandfather. But throughout the years, this thing called urban renewal, which was an attempt by uh, policymakers in Richmond, on council, and throughout, honestly, a lot of parts of our country, pushed for a renewal of areas that were considered were typically African American, predominantly owned, or non-white owned. One of the things that we saw here in the city was our highway that runs directly through the middle of the city, 581, was built, and the land was acquired by things like eminent domain, as well as our civic center, commonly called the Berglund Center. Partially when all that happened, and then things like Henry Street, like I said, where my family had their store, got kind of torn down and kind of demolished. When that happened, people don't disappear, right?
Yeah.
Like that. So they had to go somewhere, and they ended up pushed out towards northwestern part of Roanoke, where places had been not really developed, and specifically there was this area commonly called Evan Spring, which was about, I think, 100 some odd acres. And again, I apologize that lawyers are very smart people that are very bad at math, and figures are not my strong suit. So I apologize. But one of the things that happened was, it was kind of promised to people, or implied at the very least, that like, hey, this place would not be developed. This is a place where you all can enjoy nature and that kind of thing. Fast forward 30, 40, 50 years, and there's been always talk about developing that part of the city, because it's, again, the last kind of area that hasn't been developed, to put in big box store. Top Golf has previously been discussed, like that type of thing. There's a couple of different ways you can kind of analyze Evan Spring. One is obviously the racial aspect of all this. There's another thing, like, so Roanoke is a valley. We're at the base of the Blue Ridge. When we have, and previously we were a swamp.
So flooding concerns.
Yeah, flooding. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that has happened, I think a few years before I was born, was this big flood in downtown. As a result, council kind of put in infrastructure in order to try and mitigate any sort of flooding that would happen in the future. And thus far, we haven't been, knock on wood, we haven't had any, major floods to the scale of what we saw in I think it was 84 or 85. Again, before I was born, so I apologize. But we haven't had that. But one of the things that's kind of protecting us, at least downtown, is Evan Spring. And in Roanoke, over the last 20 some odd years, we've seen a massive increase in downtown residents. I live downtown too, so this is partially self-serving. But the reality is about like 3% of our entire city lives downtown. And at the time when the flood happened, it was probably less than 20 people that live downtown. So when we're talking about like the potential for something major like that, there are real concerns that could potentially happen down the line.
Very intriguing. Very intriguing. And you also mentioned how that connects to urban renewal. And I've heard that there are promises with that seems to have been only said but not acted upon. And I'm also, one of the promises was like a fund for Roanoke-based reparations. And what seems to be not the issue with it, but the update on that. What is it happening? Is it likely to happen anytime soon?
I would love to see something happen, honestly. I mean, like I said, my family was directly impacted by urban renewal and everything like that. One of the things, though, that, so when one of my uncles was still with us, he kind of told this joke, and in Arabic, it doesn't translate well, so the humor isn't necessarily there, so I'll do my best. We have a part of town called Gainesboro, which is where where a lot of people have been, and that's one of the areas that was deeply impacted by urban renewal. One of the jokes he told was like, politicians will come through Gainesboro, and that's all they will do. And so, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I would not kind of continue that, because Roanoke, back since the 50s had been talking about Gainsborough and trying to rectify. As for what reparations or anything like that looks like, we're in continued talks with the Equity Empowerment Advisory Board, which is a board that advises council on these types of issues. And I'm sorry that I'm shaking the camera while I'm doing this on my desk.
I'll shake my camera too.
But they're advising us. But one of the concerns that we have is just the financial aspect. Like many cities in Virginia and throughout the Commonwealth or throughout the country, we're seeing issues with the financial situation, and part of that is trying to rectify. Now, my goal is to make sure that it happens. I don't know how quickly it will, but I hope that it will. And depending on what council, both currently and what potentially future councils look like, will probably direct that.
You also ran on both bringing crime down and bringing in an influx of new businesses. I want to tackle those right now. Have you seen any efforts to bring crime down that have been successful in the past year?
Yeah, the reality is that we're seeing a massive decrease in homicide rates throughout Roanoke City. I attribute a lot of that more so to our chief of police than anything that council could possibly do. With Chief Booth, who is the former chief over in Danville, we've seen a massive, an actual real decrease in the crime rate. One of the things that I did talk about both during the particularly in my first campaign, because it was more back then, this was before previous council had hired Chief Booth, was that one of the reasons what got me into running and everything was somebody got shot outside my building. And that, for a lot of parts in the city at the time, certainly wouldn't be a reason to run and spend a lot of money to run. It'd be just kind of this reality. Except I live catty corner to City Hall. And so that was a concern. Now, there was the creation of the Gun Violence Task Force, which, soon thereafter with all this, after that shooting. And I thought hey, this might be an opportunity where government is actually going to do something good. But, one of the things that we saw continued is that there was some increase quite a bit in crime. Partially that could be the pandemic, that kind of thing. I don't think that there's any one solution when we talk about crime. I mean, we could talk about hey, access to education. We could talk about, hey, access to real jobs, which leads into probably the next question that you're going to bring up. But, it isn't a one size fits all. It does take time. It does build.
Yeah, that sounds more like the concept of to prevent sickness, you eat healthy over years and years and years. And that's what the quality education would be. That's what good jobs would be from year to year, is that's what would bring crime down over time. So the idea of something to do all at once is a little more tricky. I guess the same might work with, I want to run on bringing in new jobs to Roanoke. Granted, it's only been a year, but has there been initiatives that you could speak on? And have you seen any new businesses? And considering what I'll have on later tonight on another show, are any of them data centers? And if they are, what dangers might that bring?
So, so the data center thing first, not directly in Roanoke City. There has been with Botetourt, which is an adjoining county. There's been a push towards there's been a Google data center that's been looking at going in there. When we talk about, as for more businesses, one of the things, can't really obviously talk about everything, but one of the things that you can do and kind of notice is we do have closed sessions quite a bit, just as a matter of government force. And I have noticed that since I've been on council, and I attribute this again to economic development, a push for the new city manager, this type of thing. Like we've had a lot of closed meetings specifically about new businesses that are looking to come in that haven't announced, obviously. And it's something which I happen to notice about like 3 or 4 months in, and that's partially because we are trying to prioritize that type of economic development throughout the city.
Good. Good. I guess my next concerns is you touched on businesses and crime rates. Um, what about like other taxes besides property tax? I've heard that there was a meals tax that
Yeah.
was tricky there in Roanoke, and I've also heard that there's been some relative funding removed or diminished from Roanoke schools. Can you touch on both of those?
Yeah. So the meals tax, there's pretty early on when, and I say early on because it feels like I've aged 5 years in one sometimes. But pretty early on, there's a push towards increasing the meals tax by 1 cent. The reason why I voted against it is because that one of the things that we tend to see, and this is something which I saw in which Fairfax has a bunch of data on, like other cities in our Commonwealth have it. Like every cent that you increase, you end up usually decreasing by about, I think it was like conservatively, it was like 3 cents or 4 cents of how much people are spending, right? At restaurants. And because of the way that we deal with consumption taxes, meaning the more people spend, the more tax revenue that the city gets. It doesn't make sense for us to increase the tax that would cause us to potentially get a little bit less. At least that's what the data had suggested. Not to mention, there's plenty of people that are restaurateurs that are looking at this and being like, well, if something happens like food prices increase, they can't raise their prices too much because people are going to have to make eventually a choice about where they're getting food. So that's another thing. The third is that generally speaking, when meals tax particularly increase, servers and wait staff tend to see a decrease in the amount of tipping that happens. And that also has ripple effects towards other businesses. Like we've had in the past good and continue to have good people that are choosing to busk out in downtown, and entertain people and that kind of thing, and they may not see as much traffic that goes through there. So that kind of is like things that we are weighing. As for the school system, one of the things that had been done by some of the previous council for years was that this idea that we contribute 40% of tax revenue to the school system. It's relatively clean. It's simple. It keeps politics out of education. Both last year, both in 2024 and then in 2020, and then in this past year, council has decided to shift that policy. For me, I look at it from both what data tells me and then what when talking with teachers and students and everything. Like basically a dollar spent on education ends up usually reaping about like $8 in revenue. Now we're not talking like immediate, like it's very much throughout the lifespan of a person, but that's what the data suggests. I know it sounds like a lot, and I know but there's plenty of people in I know it's not always the typical Republican kind of view, but there's plenty of people, especially in our region, like Senator Suderline, and others throughout all of like this part of Virginia that are Republican that are very like adamant about the way that we spend in education funding. And so it ends up being really important to both, the future of our region, as well as, generally what we see in return.
You don't foresee any ripple effects from the possible scuttling of the Department of Education from the past year or so, right?
Uh, our region, maybe there might be some, but not to the point, because a lot of our funding typically comes from both local government, state government. There is some from the federal government
Mhm.
when it comes to education funding, but there are ways where I anticipate that some of that funding will be likely coming back anyway. So that's kind of what I'm going to anticipate now. As somebody who is a lawyer, who is very cognizant about the federal law, I am always uh, very. I'm one of those people that is like, hey, I don't count my chickens before they hatch. So I'm very much like, yeah, let's get that first. So yeah, um, yeah.
Yeah, you and I both, as someone interested in politics, will definitely keep watching the federal news as well for updates. And that, as you mentioned, that it might have some ripple effects here. You're going to be putting your ear to the ground to see what might happen. I'm also curious, and if because we didn't discuss this particular topic in advance, but it's been a lot in my mind the past couple of weeks as nationwide it has due to um, basically ice type stuff.
Mhm.
And I would like to have your opinion. You don't necessarily have to give it, but just your view in the federalist aspect, from the federal government down the state government, city of Roanoke government as a hypothetical, as
Mhm.
to whether or not you, representing the city government, would encourage, say, cooperation with federal officials who are trying to do federal immigration laws, say, in the city limits of Roanoke. And I
Mhm.
don't even know if something like that has already happened. I do know here in 757, we have had someone who was killed while trying to cross the interstate because
Mhm.
they were trying to get rid of not be captured by ICE officials. So in that instance, you're a Republican here. Does that necessarily mean that we're going to have distinct opinions on that role of government from Roanoke all the way up to DC on that topic?
I certainly hope not. I mean, one of the things that I talk about when discussing this is, I look at it from being an attorney, and one of the things that we see constantly, both from a just legal perspective, is what is the role of the federal government and the limits thereof. Like the slight not good news, the slight positive, no, still not the right word. The comforting kind of thing is that this question of the limits of governmental power, both on a federal level and a state level, is something that literally goes back to the founding of our country. Like
Mhm, mhm.
when you look at the debates that Hamilton and Jefferson and the other anti-federalist had, it was this question of where does the limits of federal government and what does the right of the states have. So going not to go into a complete history lesson, I'm not trying to dissuade that. I think one of the things that when I talk with people, it's that I'm an attorney. I have to go and talk about what the law um, is in this regard. The federal government does have complete purview over immigration law. Like that they occupy the entire field. Um, does actions raise concerns for me? Yeah, of course they do. I'm again an attorney. I know what the limits of federal government is and what state action is. Um, I the way I look at it is there are certain things that I don't know. As far as I know, there's been only one incident where Immigration and Customs Enforcement have been in Roanoke. But I need to preface that one of the issues is that the federal government doesn't technically have to tell local governments that when they're acting. It is usually done as a courtesy. Um, but that doesn't mean that this stuff doesn't necessarily happen.
And to my understanding, I don't know of any necessary responsibility from a city government to help the federal government do their actions therein. That would also be a courtesy, but I'm not aware of a literal law that says, say, Roanoke would have to follow in
Some
line
of
with type
this,
stuff.
yeah. So some of this would hypothetically have to come from the power of the purse string, meaning, okay, you choose not to. What's the ramifications thereof? Um, like I'm trying to think if there would be any. Well, none comes to mind. But again, I
You're right. The feds have the dominion on immigration law. As soon as you said that, I'm like Arizona versus U.S. That's when
Yep.
the Supreme Court decided that. But that's because Arizona, the state, was trying to do something outside of what the federal government had done. This is the flip. This is the federal government doing stuff downward. So,
But the problem is that because we are technically a state government, and
Mhm.
the Virginia itself acts as that's the question, and I think that this is
Yeah.
going to be a question which will have to be decided in the federal courts, or courts in general, probably over time.
And I hear that. I guess the relative last topic I mentioned here, because I was scrolling up over my prepared questions and I forgot this one.
Mhm.
I live in Portsmouth. Portsmouth,
Yeah.
a couple of years back, opened up Rivers Casino. I have been there. I placed some bets on NFL games. I don't exactly know. I know that the parking lot is full all the time, but I don't
Mhm.
necessarily see that that has hugely brought prosperity to the city of Portsmouth.
Mhm.
So, in that instance, as someone who thinks just as much on the topic of a potential casino in Roanoke, what would you like to see happen?
For me, I have had major concerns about the potential for a casino, specifically at the Berglund Center. So, like I mentioned earlier, the Berglund Center, where it is now, is our civic center. It was originally acquired by eminent domain, and during the process of urban renewal. So, reality that we kind of have to deal with. One of the things that I do, am cognizant of is that when we talk about things like the apology, it raises concerns that this is something which was acquired by eminent domain, um, that the casino would potentially be built on. Now, I get that. Like, these are concerns that I have. I think that there's going to be a chance, like, depending on if between now and a potential referendum, um, as far as I know, the city doesn't have a sponsor for this. As far as I know, like, that's whether or not that happens this year or not is up in the air. Um, One of the things that I have have pointed out too, though, is that if it were to pass the General Assembly, get signed by the governor, it has to go to a referendum, and ultimately, Roanokers will have a chance to actually say that. Thus far, what I'm hearing from people is predominantly no. They have concerns about crime. They have concerns about what type of jobs that this actually will bring in. What's the actual cost? Unlike places like Danville or Portsmouth or that type of thing, or Petersburg or these other cities that have this, Roanoke's not near a border. Like, we're in the middle of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I think the closest one is about like 80 miles across mountain roads to West Virginia, but I mean, nobody really takes them in that type of long-term kind of thing. Uh, I think when we talk about these types of questions, I personally will probably be voting against it. I have, like I said, I have these real concerns, and they haven't really been answered.
Mhm. Yeah, to which case, I can't report as someone who lives in Portsmouth to see Portsmouth doing so much better because it happens.
Mhm.
Portsmouth already had a bit of a reputation of having kind of high crime relative to other 757 cities. So I can't say that crime resulted from the casino either. I just like when I wrote a paper in at ODU against the concept of taxpayer-funded sports stadiums, that it had
You and
a
I agree.
yeah, that it
Yeah.
had the idea of bringing in a lot of economic activity, but it actually realizes that it doesn't really bring in that much economic activity because it's just a substitution for what other people would do elsewhere in the city.
Yeah.
And yeah, all those cars that I see in Portsmouth, I don't even know if those are people who are from Norfolk and Chesapeake and Virginia Beach who just traveled over and deposited their money in Portsmouth or not, especially because the casino itself takes most of the money.
Mhm.
So that could be the drawback. And I imagine it would be the similar in Roanoke if that happened, but it's not on the docket just
Yeah.
yet. So
And
it's top.
until it is, I mean, right now it's, like I said, kind of DOA.
Yep.
But I mean, Richmond's been known to change quite overnight. So we'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Now, typically, when I'm interviewing someone, it's someone who is running for
Mhm.
office, and I give them the floor to do like a pitch for themselves. And we don't need to do that now because you're already in office. So, what I want to have you do is just sort of bring a closing, maybe to viewers, just a little bit maybe about yourself and
Mhm.
what you are seeing that you want to accomplish for Roanoke that you think is probably close to happening.
Well, I know that you have a wide audience across the state, and one of the things I would love to see, if y'all haven't been to Roanoke, come down. Um, we have good restaurants, good hotels, good outdoor kind of facilities, that kind of thing. I think one of the things that when um, when we talk about politics, like in general, like this is one of the things where I think a lot of it's about talking with people. I don't know, like, uh, how many Republicans have you had on the show? Out of curiosity.
You'd be
My-
surprised that I have more people who are
Okay.
Republicans who say yes. I've had John Curran on recently.
Yeah.
Tonight I will have on Haley Dollar, who ran in the HD 70 Republican primary.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Which is great because, like, one of the things that I talk about with people is, a lot of times politicians tend to talk at you. They don't tend to kind of talk with you, if that makes sense. Um, I think one of the things that I've seen success over, like, regardless of if you agree with me, if you didn't agree with me, that kind of thing, like, you'll generally know where and why I vote a particular way or why I have these particular views. If that's something like, this is what the law says and that's what informs me, or if this is what I'm hearing from people, or this is what I think that, is good for Roanoke, that kind of thing does tend to kind of influence my thinking. And I think that sometimes gets lost in a lot of discussions about politics, especially nowadays when you hear, the talking heads on like CNN and others, where they're like, oh, such and such happened, and this is like why this is terrible, and that's that type of thing. And it's like not actually talking with people. It's
Mhm.
not understanding the nuances of what type of things have, and like that's one of the things I kind of attribute some success towards with this and what I was able to accomplish when I ran. Um, it's that I tend to talk with everybody. I joke with some people. Is like there was a 24-hour period where I went from talking to recovering heroin addicts to literally a member of Congress. Like in that span of that day, it was a very odd day. But it's one of those things that I think gets lost. And the like I said during when we were talking about the federal government, like the reality is that some solace can be taken in the fact that we are still arguing over the questions of what does it mean to represent ourselves? What does it
Mhm.
mean to have a federal government and a state government and dual sovereigns? What does it mean to have these types of things? And you know, while there are always bumps on the road with all of that, and sometimes those bumps are like cliffs, but while there are bumps, it's something that I think that we can kind of at least take some solace in, right? Like
Yeah.
when I ran both times, I pretty much reached out to everybody that was running, because in Roanoke we vote the top three, and top three wins for the at-large thing. So like I'm like, hey, there could be a chance we're working together. Let's chat, have a cup of coffee. We probably agree on like 90% of things, and there's probably about 10% that we can absolutely bicker and anger and yell at each other for if we really want to. But I don't think that it solves anything. So let's chat about it. And to everybody's credit that I ran, both against or with, they all met with me, and I think that that's more hopeful in the long-term health of the republic than oftentimes what Twitter or CNN, or I'm using CNN as a reference to like all media, what we tend to hear about. I try and talk with people, try to ask them questions, try and talk, that kind of thing. And like I said, I've seen success. Like I said, like me, hate me, despise me, yell at me in the comments. It helps your engagement, right? So yell at me in the comments.
I encourage that as well, because I would like the traction.
Also, like, subscribe, do all the nice YouTube things.
There we go.
Share it on social. I don't think that these questions that we talk about generally get solved overnight. Mm-hmm. The truth of the matter is that nuance, I hope, is alive in politics. And that's kind of what I've seen when we talk about governing. I talk with people, and people kind of wonder why, like, one of the fundamental questions I constantly get asked when talking with people about the election was like, how did you do this? Like, because this is not something which happens. You're Republican, Trump's on the ballot. How did you win? I think a lot of it, like, I had a good team behind me. We were out at I was out at early voting pretty much every day, except when Hurricane Helene, the remnants of it, came through, in which case I took a half day. There's a photo of me fighting an umbrella that my God bless her mother took. My mother took during that. But a bunch of other people like that were believing in me. But a lot of it was just talking with people and showing up. I think like one of the issues that we have is that when politicians kind of become entrenched in where they are, they kind of stop working for the public, right? And it becomes like this party centric kind of thing. And the example I use here is like Roanoke, like I said, first Republican elected in 20 some odd years. When you stop having to do that, when you stop having to show up, when you stop having to talk with people, and you're only worried about a primary, you're not listening to your constituents anymore. And like, I try to make sure that I am listening to people when I do that. And that was one of the things, like, I would just go, show up, be like, hey, this is me, this is who I am. Yeah, I know this is a lot more long-winded than probably you were expecting.
But I appreciate the stream of consciousness anyway.
Yeah.
Because it shows that you literally are a man of the people.
Yeah.
And that's how I would like to view good governance myself. And I want to thank you, of course, for coming on. And the reason why I chose Remarkable is because it seems like even people on the left, like myself and some of my friends who said that they like you so much, you've shown why on this show and others. So I do appreciate you, coming on, sharing your thoughts, and definitely want to hear more from you in the future, good sir.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. And I will point out, you're probably the first person that's ever called me remarkable. So I do appreciate that, man. Yeah.
Again, well, stay clear of the snow if it goes your way too. And just have a great weekend, good sir.
Thanks. You too. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, sir. This has been another great SchezzWho episode. It's a doubleheader, though. Tune in again at 7 o'clock when I interview Haley Dollar. But this has been Councilman Nick Hagen. Hope you guys get to see this video and learn more about him as he serves the people of Roanoke to the best of his ability. Remember, like, share, comment on SchezzWho, and I'll see you next time. You guys have a great night.